Hello and welcome to Whisky Resource. My name is Mark. This is review number 137. I've already poured the dram. It's from a bottle I picked up last week from Masters of Malt. Just letting it air. Before I get into that, just want to briefly talk about budget whiskies. Are budget whiskies typically those that you can pick up for considerably less than the average price of that age of whiskey, let's say, would normally resale for? Are they worth it? So this time of year, season, it is the 1st December. We're seeing the supermarkets, Aldi, Lidl, put out their Christmas releases. At the moment, you have got the 18-year-old Glenfarclas from Aldi, which is a Speyside whisky for $39.95. I've not tried it. And then you've got the Ben Bracken now from Lidl. Last year was a 16-year-old Islay. A lot of people believed it was a Lagavulin. This year they've released an 18-year-old Islay, again for $39.95. And there's debate as to which Islay distillery it is this year. From what I've seen so far, people suggest it could be a Kalila. But are they worth it? Now I did try last year's Ben Bracken 16-year-old, the one that people purported to be from Lagavulin, and it was very good. So much so that I did buy a bottle, which I put away and I can't remember where I put it, but I have a bottle. But are they generally any good, these budget whiskies? If you see a deal that is too good to be true, is it invariably a waste of money? Is it a good punt? Or is it going to be something spectacular? Invariably, if something is bad, people say it's bad. If it's good as well, people generally want to share it and they'll let go and say, yeah, this is fantastic whiskey. So the whiskey that I bought today, just happened to come across it while I was browsing Master of Malt's website, and they've got a range of different age statement whiskies available at the lower end of the age spectrum, competitive prices. But as you progress through the age range and start hitting the 18-year-olds and 21-year-olds, they become too good to be true when you look at how much they cost. So I'm going to bring this particular whiskey into shot, so you can have a look at the bottle. And I'll talk a little bit more about it, because what made me buy it was what happened when I did the research into it. So here it comes into shot. So it comes in this presentation tin, which is almost a suede effect, brown suede effect there tin. It's got a nice texture to it, got gold detailing on it. But you can see this is a Lismore 21-year-old. It's a Speyside single malt whiskey. This is the bottle. It comes in this really nice bottle. This is the 21-year-old The Legend, they call it. Big cork there. This is reminiscent of some of the Edredor decanter releases that they pour out. And it is a really nice decanter bottle. As I say, I picked it up from Masters of Malt. It retails, wait for it, 21-year-old whiskey from Speyside, bottled at 43% ABV. It retails for £59.95. Now, I'll quickly get my phone because I'm going to give you an idea as to what other prices they have for things. So they do two versions of the Lismore 21-year-old. They do this one, The Legend, at 43%. We don't know about chill filtration, no mention. We don't know about colour. This gets a average value score of 87.15 out of 100 for this particular release. But they then also do another 21-year-old, again, bottled at 43% ABV. They don't really say much about the differences between them, slightly different tasting notes. But the other 21-year-old's 47.88. They do a couple of 18-year-olds, again, bottled at 43% ABV. You've got one at £37.36, and you've got a second one, which is a special reserve, which is bottled at 40%, which is £34.68. So that's two 18-year-old whiskies, 34.68 and 37.36, cheaper than what you can pick up Aldi and Lidl's Christmas releases for. That's like amazing, absolutely amazing. Obviously for Masters of Malt, delivery you'd have to consider that on top. But in the Lismore range as well, they've got a 12-year-old, they've got 5-year-old, they've got an 8-year-old, they've got a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old special reserve, and a 12-year-old special reserve. Now, I believe one of them, the 18-year-old special reserve, is actually a blended Scotch. Yeah, it's a special blended Scotch whisky. So enough of the Lismore range. Who are Lismore? Never heard of them. Well, they've got a website, lismorescotch.com, and when you visit them, it is pretty much geared up to the American market. And that pans out when you look at further research into this particular brand. They are designed for the export market, Lismore. Now, on the back of the bottle, they talk about the company William Lundie and Co. I never heard of William Lundie and Co. The Lundie family were a highly respected whisky brokers in Scotland with access to the finest casks of Scotch whisky. So that's a little bit of what's on the back there. Who are they? So if you do a search for William Lundie and Co, a Google search, there's some information about how they produce various whiskies, and it's for the export market. But do a company's house lookup on William Lundie and Co. Because if you do a company's house lookup, this is where things get really interesting. So under the officers, the directors of the company, you have one John Grant listed. And the correspondence address is listed as being Glenfarclas, Ballindalloch. So, John Grant of Glenfarclas is on the board of Lismore, or William Lundie and Co. It doesn't stop there though, because if you actually look at the address on the back of the bottle, the postcode there, that is the postcode for Glenfarclas Distillery. So, do we have here a Glenfarclas bottled as a different brand? So they don't say which distillery it comes from, and certainly when they're starting putting out blended Scotch whiskies, as far as I'm aware, Glenfarclas don't do a grain whisky. But this is a single malt. Poured me down here a little while ago because it's 21-year-old, it needs to air a bit. So you've got to think to yourself, why would Glenfarclas do this? Well, I've got my own opinion shortly as to what's going on here. But when I first nosed this particular whisky, it immediately, light bulbs went off in my brain, like, I've had that smell before. Where do I know that smell from? It's fruity. We're getting apples and pears. It's rather honeyed, a little bit of sherry going on there, but a real small touch of sherry. It's a bit golden syrupy. It's familiar. It's very familiar. Now, this is a sherry influenced whiskey. We don't know whether or not it's, well actually it says there, it says matured in sherry hogsheads for more than 21 years. So sherry matured. But the sherry coming off there isn't sherry bomb. It's not intense. It is 43% ABV, so obviously it's been bottled down, diluted down to the bottle strength that they want. But as I say, it's familiar. Well, I'll tell you why it was familiar. Because it actually smells like these two bottles here. So, the Glenfarclas 10-year-old. This smells pretty much identical. This bottle here, the Glenfarclas 12-year-old. Again, it smells very similar. Both of these are sherried whiskies. But they're not sherry intense, they're not sherry bombs. I'm going to come on to what I think's going on here in a moment, but we'll give you a bit of a tasting. So on the palate. It's syrupy with honey, golden syrup, touch of toffee, there's apple, there's pears, and there's a touch of stewed fruits, a little bit of cherry. You can tell that there's a sherry influence going on there, but it's quite a delicate sherry influence. There's oak bitterness. There's a bit of spice that you would expect from a sherry influenced whiskey. There's a little bit of wood oak, I keep saying that, wood spice rather, and oak, and it's fairly sweet, and it's actually a really nice tasting dram. It's not too dissimilar to how these two taste. It's a bit, I've never used this word, I don't think, on any of my reviews because it doesn't really mean an awful lot, but it's smooth. In the context of how I think smooth is explained away, is that all of the kind of sharp, spiky edges of the flavour, which generally comes from immature whiskey, has gone. It's been flattened out so that you've got a more cohesive taste, where all the flavours are married together in a uniform and pleasant way, let's say. That's what we're getting here. It's very drinkable. I would not say that that tasted like what I thought a 21-year-old whiskey would taste like. There's a bit of menthol, mintiness towards the finish as well. It's very pleasant. Very pleasant. We'll come on to what I think in terms of is it worth it shortly. But what do I think's going on here? Well, I believe that this is a Glenfarclas malt. And I suspect that Glenfarclas have got some really good quality casks that they've used for their own Glenfarclas branding. But maybe into the third and fourth, maybe fifth refill, the quality of the whiskey getting rested in those casks doesn't quite match up with what Glenfarclas want to put out as their own single malt whiskey, and maybe they use some of that to go into 105, and maybe they use some of it maybe to blend in as well with some of their younger whiskies, maybe the 8, the 9, the 8, the 10 and the 12. But I think this, obviously being a single malt, rather than a blend, is a Glenfarclas distilled spirit aged in, as I say, those 3, 4, 5 refill ex-sherry casks. Let us know your thoughts on that. If you've tried this whiskey, what do you believe it is? In terms of, is it value? Well, $59.95 for a 21-year-old whiskey is pretty incredible. And is it worth it? Well, there's a point where you cut your losses on whiskey, where you have to take a punt at a whiskey. Now, I've got a cap of £100. I don't spend any more than £100 on a bottle of whiskey. For me, that puts a lot of 21-year-old whiskies out of reach. Off the top of my head, there's only 2 that I know of that I could afford at £100 or less, and that is the Glenfarclas 21-year-old and Knock and Do 21, which I haven't tried, Knock and Do. Some blends sit under 21 as well, blended Scotch whiskies, but invariably there aren't any single malts unless you're looking at independent bottlings that sit at below £100. So that puts an aged whiskey fair and squarely into my price range, which is why I thought 21-year-old, $59.95. After me research, figured it was a Glenfarclas. How am I going to say this? It was related to Glenfarclas with John Grant on the board of directors, the address being Glenfarclas. I thought, well, I can't imagine it's going to be a terrible whiskey. not with that association going on there. They're still going to want a quality product. So yes, I believed when I purchased it, it was worth it. Now I've tasted it and got my head around it. I do believe it is worth it. Definitely. It doesn't offer anything mind-blowing or different to the cheaper, younger Glenfarclas whiskies. But it puts in reach for those people who want to try an older whiskey. You've got something here that most people can afford to pay for. It's not mind-blowing. It's not an incredibly tasting whiskey. Probably need longer time in the glass. I've tried it with a touch of water, and the water doesn't really do an awful lot. But when you consider that you could spend 100, 150, 200 pounds on a 21-year-old whiskey and it will not really be that good, this suddenly becomes a really good buy. So much so that I'm actually very tempted when I've got the funds to do so, to try the 18-year-olds and to try some of the younger whiskies, because they're affordable and, well, if they're just Glenfarclas in another form, fantastic. I'm a Glenfarclas fan, you probably all know that. But this one is, let's say, pretty incredible value. Have you tried it? What do you think about it? As I say, it's got to be those refill sherry casks they use in there, because the influence of the sherry is quite subtle. Invariably, there will be blends of some first fill and second fill sherry going on there as well, but I think the majority is definitely refill. And yeah, it's a decent whiskey, and certainly something that anybody that's a bit of a whiskey fan would have to try. And if you're looking for a present for somebody for whiskey, a whiskey present for somebody for Christmas, you can't really go wrong with this. It's a brand that you probably haven't heard of, and it's 21-year-old, and I can't quite work out why it's called a legend. Maybe that's to do with the story on the back of the label. Incidentally, there is a little leaflet comes inside of the box as well, just there, which is a bit superfluous as well, but yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised by that. Although, as I say, it doesn't offer anything more than you can get for half the price, between £30 and £40, let's say. Although it does take the edge off some of the youthfulness. That's me done. Nearly 18 minutes. This is a bit of a longer review, but this one's a bit of a unique whiskey, I think. Laters.